What's up, guys, and welcome to another book review episode. So today this is going to be both like a sports and politics book, and it's titled The Russian Five, and it's a hockey book, and it's about the five Russian former Soviet Union hockey players that defected from the old Soviet Union into the NHL. So hockey, in general here in the U.S. is not the most popular sport. It's usually like probably the fourth after baseball, basketball, and football. But it has a big following in Canada. It's number one, and in Scandinavia, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia. Big into hockey, Sweden as well. So, but hockey has quite a bit of history in regards to like geopolitics. So I'm sure a lot of you know the event, the Miracle on Ice in 1980, in which a group of college American hockey players defeated the mighty Soviet Union, who were, professionals, but they were classified as amateur players. But basically a group of like 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds beat these 10-year professional Soviet Union hockey players. Miracle on Ice in Lake Placid, New York. And it's counted as one of the greatest sporting moments ever in history, not only because of the big underdog that the Americans were, but because of also, at the time, it was during the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, so there's a lot of politics involved. So hockey in terms of like geopolitics, and then you also had the 1972 Summit Series between Canada and the Soviet Union, and then during the late 80s, mid to late 80s, as the Soviet Union was starting to fall, a lot of their players started to defect to the West in order to play in the NHL, and at the time, Russia, or Soviet Union, which you want to call it, they literally probably had some of the best talent, hockey players in the world, but they didn't have any opportunity to, come and play in the NHL because the government obviously would not let them. And also at the same time, though, they were also soldiers within the Soviet Union, so technically, like, they're obligated to stay. And there's stories of defection, like if they were to defect while in the military, then possibly they could get the death sentence, or their family members, if they got away, their family members will be persecuted. So it's a hard time for them in regards to their ability to move, because basically they had to sign these like lifetime contracts, and basically they were the best, but they're not being paid anywhere near what the NHL players are. They had to practice and play games 11 months out of the year. I mean, basically the whole year. They only had like 1 month of vacation time. They were constantly monitored wherever they went by KGB agents. So basically what this book kind of goes over is, it goes over the the stories of the five individuals that ended up playing together for the Detroit Red Wings. So the Red Wings were really the first team to really start drafting Russian players. So what would happen is, back then, even when the Soviet Union existed and they weren't giving their players away, a lot of these NHL teams would still maybe spend a draft pick, not like a first or second round pick, but like a later draft pick, like a 6th, 7th, 8th round on these Russian players, and then with the hope in regards to trying to get them to come over, whether it means negotiating with the government, or anticipating that the country will change its rules regarding their rules for them coming over. So a lot of these teams spent draft picks on these players, but obviously they would have to wait like years before they came. So the Red Wings, though, were one of the one of the very first teams to really kind of invest in it. And not only would they draft it, spend their draft picks on these players, but they would send people to go there and talk to them and talk to these players about possibly defecting. So a lot of times, the Soviet Union, or these countries, they go on tours in Europe, or they sometimes come here to America, and they play like exhibition games against teams from that country. So that's where they'll try to make the defection point, where they'll sneak out of the hotel or after the game or whatever, So this is written by the guy's name is Keith Gave, and I think he was a journalist for one of the Detroit newspapers. And basically, he was one of the people that was chosen by the Red Wings management to go over and talk to some of the players into defecting. And then, don't make fun of me for my pronunciation, but some of the early players that they talked to was Slava Fetisov. He's one of the greatest hockey players of all time. I mean, very decorated. He was part of the 1980 Miracle on Ice team, but even, after that, Olympic gold medal, world championship, one of the best defensemen ever. At the time when he was playing, he was definitely the best defenseman in the world. So he was one of the first players that they talked to. Another one was Slava Kovalev, and later on Igor Larionov, again another decorated player. He played in the Miracle on Ice game, and then Vladimir Kostinov, and then obviously I think the most productive one in terms of the NHL was Sergei Fedorov. He's quite known. He became one of the one of the most well-known hockey players in the world by the time, during the 90s, offensive player. So this book kind of goes into the stories, into like how they were able to convince each of those 5 players to defect from the Soviet Union. And it's, amazing detail, because now, it makes for a good story. But if you think about it, at the time, like, was probably a scary time, because the Soviet Union was like, basically, they didn't mess around, and they were very tight-knit as far as, this kind of stuff happening. So for those players to take a chance, they're risking, their life, their loved ones, what happens if they would have got caught, stuff like that, and then when they did come, there was, they couldn't go back to their country for, I think a number of years, until after the Soviet Union collapsed, and then it just became the Russian Federation. So, they were willing to pretty much give up everything in order to come here to the West and play for the National Hockey League. So, you don't even have to be a hockey fan. Like, I think that if you're someone who's interested in politics, especially Cold War politics, or you have any interest between like U.S. and Russia relations, it's still a great book. I'm not the biggest hockey fan. Like, I don't play hockey, but I love, there's quite of, interesting history in regards to these like Cold War topics, like Miracle on Ice, the Summit series between Canada and the Soviet Union, and then stories like these in which some of the best hockey players in the world were Russian, and they're defecting their home country to come play for NHL teams. And I grew up in Wisconsin. They don't have an NHL team, so my favorite team actually growing up was the Detroit Red Wings. Steve Yzerman was my favorite player. So I remember it was a big deal, because you had these 5 Russian players all playing together at the same time, and it's never been done before in the NHL history. So basically it was like a Soviet Union team playing on the ice together, but they're all wearing a Red Wings jersey. So it was a big time. It was a big moment. And it was like a, not only for the Red Wings organization, obviously they turned around from having like a bad stretch to winning, eventually winning the Stanley Cup. I think they won like 3 times, or 3 or 4 times after, they got these players in 97, 98, 01, and then 08. Yeah, so they won 4 Stanley Cups. But basically, this was part of the rebuild. And it's not so much like it does go into the Red Wings history, but it goes into quite a number bit as far as the politics involved and the stories of these players. So, if you're a sports fan, I would, it's worth checking out. It was a great read, and it was kind of like, you're living in or you're like reading through like a James Bond movie, because basically they would set up these meetings, they'll be waiting for this player to come out of the locker room, or there's like an agent, KGB agent that's like, kind of staring at them. So it was really cool, whisking them in the middle of the night, back of a car. So it's kind of like, stuff that you see in movies, but it did happen in real life. And it's crazy, some of the stories and some of the activities that not only the Red Wings, but later on some of these other NHL teams did in order to get these players. And you know, it turned to be, you know, worth it because again, these are some of the best hockey players at the time, and they made a huge impact on the NHL. And obviously for the Red Wings, it paid off, and you know, winning a few Stanley Cups. So again, it's the Russian Five. Pick it up, check it out. You know, it's a great read. You'll get it done fairly shortly. You know, it's gripping, and I had a great time reading it. So that's it for that. I'll leave a link in the description, and let me know if anyone's read it, your thoughts on it. So till next time, guys. Talk to you later. Peace.